This is the healthy tension that I think exists between crafting out scripts and ultimately having a conversation, right? Because one of the worst criticisms that I make of any, like, say, cold call would be, well, that sounded really scripted. You sounded robotic. Something along those lines, where what we would argue in the opposite case is, no, you should sound more human. You know, being a good listener is a very human trait.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was Eric Quanstrom. Eric's the CMO at Science, and he's a leading expert on proactive outbound prospecting. And in our conversation today, we talk about the business of lead generation outsourcing, in particular, outsourcing sales development. However, we approach the topic from a different angle. With the rise of specialized sales companies with highly developed sales expertise, such as Science, Eric and I dig into the topic of whether sales really needs to be considered a core competency of a company that develops and sells a product or a service. Or should those product or service companies leave selling to sales companies who have really developed deeper expertise? We also explore the many lessons that Science has learned from scaling to hundreds of SDRs about how to more effectively hire and onboard and manage the sales development process. We get into all of this and much, much more. Before we get to Eric, though, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And I also want to remind you to check out my latest book, Sell Without Selling Out. It's a modern, human-centric framework for increasing your win rates and shortening decision cycles without using the salesy behaviors that so many buyers hate. It's available everywhere you shop for books, online, and in stores. So thank you for checking that out. All right, let's jump into it.
Eric, welcome back to the show.
It is so glad to be back.
Yeah, I mean, we don't do it often enough.
Agreed. This is fun.
Agreed.
This will be fun.
This will be fun, yeah. Well, also, we share a love for a restaurant we like going to for lunch as well, so
boy,
about time to do that again.
Yeah. I don't know if we want to give it away, though, because, Rancho Santa Fe is very sleepy and quiet and overprotective about who comes in and out of it.
Yeah. And personally, I don't really go for the lunch. I go for the dessert, but whatever. Yeah. So, All right. So people maybe haven't heard us talk before. Why don't you tell us a little about yourself and what Science does?
Sure. So I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Science, and that's Science without an S. So we like to say we couldn't afford it, or it's an intentional misspelling, but once you've heard the name Science, you'll never forget it.
Right.
And what we are is, frankly, an outbound lead generation company, tech-enabled, that helps other companies grow. And that's our main kind of reason for being on the business landscape and in life. And we've got a variety of ways that we do that. Probably the most common and easy to understand is that we take a lot of the conversation starting on multiple channels, email, phone, LinkedIn, over the web, and really start business conversations that then lead to other companies having a sales cycle or a pipeline that they then close towards net new growth.
Yeah. So I don't want to unfairly or limit what you say, but just to me, I would say outsource sales development.
Yeah. That's the big bucket. And we've got a lot of really cool other products, data products and ways that we go to market, even an ad product coming out soon, which is really exciting to me as a marketer. But
right. Well, so before we jump on that, though, let's talk about your people, because last time you and I talked was right after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and you have nearly 500 employees in Ukraine. Yeah. So what's the status of your people there, and how are things going there for them?
Well, I mean, I have to caveat or almost disclaim anything I'm about to say with this general knowledge that here I am sitting talking to you in Southern California in America, with business concerns or business, challenges or business moments. The war in Ukraine is life and death. And it's been very, I've witnessed bravery, courage, stress, amazing challenges that are life and death related that kind of make business, topics seem almost trite by comparison.
Right.
So it's been all of that, and frankly, a lot more. It's funny. We've we've come through the first month and a half, if you will, of the war, and knock on wood, we haven't lost any employees yet. Thank God. It's been, I think, very interesting journey towards normalcy around the feedback that I've gotten from a lot of our team members has really been, getting to work with science and getting back to work, so to speak, has actually given them a lot of the kind of routine and ability to just normalize against the backdrop of a completely surreal, unbelievable, once in a lifetime kind of event that, was an unprompted, unplanned, frankly mitigated disaster of an attack by an autocratic state that took actions that I don't think anyone saw coming, or at least not to the level that, what we've seen now with the bombings and the loss of life and frankly the war crimes. Just is
war crimes for sure.
Part disgusting, part just heart wrenching. It's been a whirlwind of again, struggle and a lot of heroism too. So I've been very proud of our team and our management and how we've gone forward and continue to move even in these distracted times.
Yeah. Yeah. When you had mentioned, you guys said, like develop apps so people could check in so you can make sure everybody's safe and so on.
Yeah, literally some folks on the software side of our business developed a check-in app for all of our employees to basically, let us know where they were in a very secure channel that, wasn't going to give their location away. And because we had folks all over the whole of Ukraine, and at least when the war started, it wasn't concentrated in the western half of Ukraine. It was mainly in the eastern portions, but then Kiev came under fire, and it's moved around, and it's been very fluid.
Yeah. Well, obviously, wish all the best for all the people there. It's just unbelievable and unwarranted, and just so maddening. So getting back to business though, because that's why we're here. Is so broader question. Then we're going to drill down on this. And you work with a lot of big companies that have lots of capabilities, as well as smaller companies. But why do companies decide to outsource, their sales development, their lead gen outsource, whether it's to you or anybody? But what's driving that? What are you offering that perhaps they can't do themselves?
Well, I think there's a lot of different reasons for choices made with outsourcing. The big broad ones are efficiency gains, expertise gains, get to market faster gains. Mm-hmm. If you really think about kind of like return on investment, the ability to tap like a trained, workforce, if you will, or a company that is ready to do multi-channel outbound, kind of at the drop, you're going to realize investment a lot faster than if you frankly are trying to do it all yourself from scratch at the start. Right. I would also argue that that's a relevant thought process for scaling any organization that wants to go from, say, number X of pipeline creation to number Y on a journey. So that scale on demand concept is relevant.
Right. Well, I mean, it raises a topic which, at least in my mind, because I've had other firms on the show that outsource other elements of the sales process, maybe the actual sales part as opposed to sales development part, or the whole full cycle. But when you talk to yourself and you talk about your expertise that you have, sort of triggers a thought in me is like, okay, business advisors advise CEOs, focus on the things doing the things that are a core competency of your company.
Yeah.
And it raises a question, is is sales necessarily a core competency of a company selling a product or service?
I think it can be. And I also think that the way that you go to market or the market go to market channels that you choose to use are all very strategic. So by default, they can be core. Now, one of the things I would say, just to contextualize or take it back just a quick second, some things that we believe here at Science, we strive to be experts in lead generation, in prospecting, in getting conversations started, in targeting the right audiences.
Mm-hmm.
We don't necessarily aspire to be experts at the nitty gritty, deep features, like 1,000 hours of training on a given solution, product, or service that our companies, are going to market with.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there's a big difference between top of the funnel, generating interest. If you're, let's take this word for what it actually is, right? We call it a sales cycle.
Right.
And so for us, in the cycle, at the very top of the funnel or at the start of that cycle, there's a rhythm, a timing, a sequencing to all of that, to generating initial interest that is fundamentally different than late sales cycle, ultimately needs assessment, or, ultimately value creation, or how you satisfice a potential buyer's needs. Yeah, I mean, this is one that's big to both of us.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can see that. But I can see, even though, a similar thing could apply in, mid-funnel, late funnel stages as well, is the reason, part of the reason I bring it up is I was just having a conversation with somebody on another episode I was recording right before this, and we're talking all about win rate, and how certainly in the software world, companies seem very accepting of what, to my perspective and many others' perspective, is really low win rates. Yeah. And it's like, well, yeah, you look at that and it's like, well, are they willing to make the investment? Which doesn't necessarily be this huge investment. They're willing to make the investment and the culture change and process change in order to become better at selling. And if they're not, then maybe it's not a core competency, right? Maybe they should be considering outsourcing it to someone that could do it better.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair, actually. And I would go to, one of the trends that I would argue is driving our business forward, and has been for quite a while, is that I think most life moves towards entropy, right? Like most things that can be specialized ultimately end up getting exactly that.
Right.
So, like the Renaissance salesperson that's doing, prospecting in the morning, taking meetings, holding account manager hands, and, going full cycle is frankly a relic and becoming somewhat extinct on the business landscape, for better or worse.
Well, but it is hard to be a specialist at all those things.
It's impossible.
Right.
And I also think about like applying not just the x-axis, but the y-axis too, which is to say, not only can you have no human being, the unicorn, is equally good at, say, prospecting and closing, mm-hmm. or, the kinds of skills that are required for late stage, sales versus early stage sales, or account management for that matter, if you're going to throw that into the mix too. Mm-hmm. But the other side of that coin is thinking about the rhythm of a sales cycle that includes the buyer and the buying team and the buying cohort or buying group, if you will, mm-hmm. because most of those steps in a consensus purchase, and frankly, unless you're selling something super transactional, most sales these days are consensus sales. And that trend line is even more aggressive. I can't recall the last time I ever heard someone say, "Oh yeah, our buying group is shrinking,"
or
like that's just,
or the decision maker is Frank.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and even that term I think is kind of a relic of the past. I've used that word twice now, but decision maker implies someone who has kind of like all authority,
right?
Yeah, all autocratic decision making. By the way, tying it to an earlier concept, like we saw how well that's working in Eastern Europe right now. But on the corporate landscape, it's the exact opposite. It's consensus democratic purchasing where regardless of what the product or service or solution is under study, and by the way, I think of every sales cycle as a change management exercise.
Yeah.
Decision influencers are going to be present in that change, especially to the extent that that change affects them. You know, whether you're a user of a given product or service, whether you're, kind of like the financial holder or the, person who gives this to a given team, enables a team, so to speak. Whether you're the product champion, hell, whether you're the snake in the grass that wants to shoot a deal dead and not change a damn thing. Ultimately, buyers have like a role that they're trying to play on their side. And so basically, if I put that on the y-axis, what I would say is you have different phases of education in any sales cycle where satisficing behavior is part of every buying group unto themselves in their circumstance for their company with their dollars in their particular competitive industry and landscape.
Right.
As such, you have to be able to compete. And we found great success, both ourselves and with our clients, in kind of meeting those buyers where they're at with a sales cycle that has its own sequence, its own rhythm. Who they meet in that sequence, the types of people that represent for our company, are actually very specialized.
Yeah. So, well, give us a sense of that in your own sales process.
Yeah. So in our own sales process, just in the prospecting phase alone, we divide inbound and outbound.
Right.
On the outbound side, we divide by channel. So we have different people that are operating on, say, digital channels like email and LinkedIn than we do on the phone channel, and different people still who are, effectively like leveraging our data and enriching and or specializing that research so that ultimately we've divided up a bunch of what are commonly thought of as one SDR role. We've chopped it up a number of different ways. And of course, the management layers on top of all of those are highly distinct and differentiated as well.
Right.
So anyways, as you move through the value chain, we have essentially those splits at the top of the funnel with prospecting, again, down to the channel level. Then they're handing off to our sales executives. Our sales executives in the science world are basically handling from discovery process. So a lot of listening and learning and understanding where our clients, what their problems are and what they want to solve, through to close one. And then once a deal is signed, the handoff occurs to our account managers. And then the people that manage our accounts from a strategic standpoint, our sales development managers, or SDMs in our world, are taking that account through. And then, of course, we recreate that same sales specialization split for our clients with lead generation, where it's channel by channel, depending on how we want to construct a go-to-market with your sales playbook.
So when you're working, we take on a new client, is because this is a conversation that's part of this week on LinkedIn is you've got an onboarding or ramp up, however you want to call it, is when you take on a new client, do you bring on new SDRs or are you using resources you have already?
Resources that we have already. And this is actually an interesting phase of growth that we got over. A few years back, we were trying to practice a just-in-time kind of like delivery model, if you will, where we were hiring, kind of like SDRs to suit. And that practice is super hard. And I'll tell you the reasons why. Again, aspiring to be lead generation experts and experts in the prospecting phase, people that we hire have to learn those lessons somewhere. And it's usually better when it's not on the client's dime, to be perfectly honest. And so we basically hire, and everyone that is part of our company usually goes through our own kind of like boot camp, works for our brand. I get the firsthand kind of like front row seat on this because what we have is called Science Core. And I get a lot of our newest members working for Science, which is both good and bad. Like we definitely see mistakes being made or lessons being learned, but it comes with our brand first.
Right. How long does it take typically to ramp up a new client?
Well, to ramp up a new client or a new SDR?
Well, okay, let's start with the SDR, then we'll get to client.
So with a new SDR, we have a number of weeks that we reserve for classroom training and kind of introduction to the business and a lot of our own, what we call Science University, and putting people through kind of a lot of our own training. And then they go moving from there into like a practicum phase, if you will, where they're working again for our brand first and foremost. Then they graduate, if you will, to client accounts. And then getting to know each one of those client accounts is also its own phase of a learning curve.
Right.
Largely because we have clients from all different industries and all different kind of like parts of the the spectrum.
Right.
All different sizes too.
Would an SDR be supporting doing work for more than one client at a time? They could be doing work for disparate industries even?
We try to pod things out to where we're concentrating and building on that industry knowledge. But the idea is yes, largely because they're working on multiple channels at once.
Interesting.
To answer that second half of the question of onboarding a client, our goal is from contract signature and start date, or what we would call account intro, and we set a call on that date, to campaign launch through all of the steps that we're going to take from onboarding, all of the learnings that we're going to try to pull out of a client and get ready. We generally like to have that process take between 10 and 20 days.
Fast. That's good.
Yeah. And this gets to the point that I was making earlier of, we definitely see one of the business drivers of go-to-market. First of all, Outbound as a channel is one that is unlike a lot of other go-to-market channels where, if I wanted to hang out a shingle and be one of the best SEO players or show up for certain Google search terms in my particular industry, be damned if you're going to do that in a month.
No.
Just sorry for keeping it real there, but the gestation period is just a lot longer for what we're trying to do along those lines in that go-to-market channel. We like to think of Outbound as a very quick to market endeavor, all things equal.
Right.
And so we've got a lot of experience in kind of like spring loading each and every one of our clients in this very like impacted or tightly wound onboarding period, where our goal is to learn as much about that client's business, more importantly, their personas that we're going to be, starting conversations with, so that we can build appropriately relevant campaigns that are going to start to show results to that client.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this. So you have these dimensions that sort of, people who are experts at, the channel they're working on, right? Outbound. And often I see this struggle with when companies are onboarding reps, SDRs, is, sort of onboarding for sales purposes, onboarding for product and knowledge and customer knowledge purposes. And one or the other sort of gets sacrificed to some degree. But here it's saying is, look, we got people who are really capable in these channels. It's easy to plug in sort of relatively easy, let's say, to plug in a new product or service that we're selling, because these people have enough experience. They won't necessarily be scripted. They're going to be more authentic, perhaps, in the way they outreach to people, more comfortable, let's say, in doing their job.
Listen, there's an art to being a professional interrupter. And let's be honest, Outbound is hard.
Yes, very.
It's it can be the most rewarding channel, because what I've experienced with Outbound is it's different from inbound in that with inbound you get what you get and you don't have a fit, right? Like you have a publicly facing website that anyone the public can access. As such, even inbound leads, if you don't have a DQ rate that's pretty high,
right,
of people that are raising their hands that don't necessarily fit your ideal customer profile, then I would be shocked and amazed. Like, and please introduce me to that traffic source that comes pre-formatted, because as a marketer, I would love to know. But on Outbound, it's the exact opposite. Like we need never reach out to people that are not good fits on paper for a given product, service, or solution. And as such, having that deliberate go-to-market ability and taking essentially the relevant value propositions forward is the name of the game. It's generating interest, where in outbound deals, oftentimes you're single sourcing.
Yeah.
You're not coming in as one of 5, vendors that are in my short list, and now it's a competitive shootout. With outbound, it's basically, hey, can I start a sales cycle and win on merits, if you will?
Right. Yeah, and even still, you have an incentive, I think, as a service provider of this type of service, to be much more diligent about DQing quickly.
Without a doubt. Without it, and that's how it rolls.
Within the internal team.
Yep. Yeah. In fact, we've designed a lot of our own inbound processes, especially to make it as friction free as possible for people to engage with science and even sign up and book meetings with our sales team, and then our own inbound SDRs to effectively get to the heart of whether or not they're a qualified fit going forward, so that we don't waste one another's time.
So give people a sense of scale. How many SDRs you guys have?
Well, it's in the hundreds. Science is currently about, as we're recording this, call it 1,100 folks.
Of which a good fraction of those are SDRs. So you're operating on a really big scale compared to most, huge scale compared to most SDR teams. I
think so.
Yeah. So do you, from a production standpoint, do you manage the SDRs differently than they would be if they were just like, in a product company selling a product?
That's a really interesting question. I think that the best way to answer it is we're very big on process. We're very big on workflow. We're very big on some ideas that have worked for us, perpetuating forward as part of our learning cycle. I referenced our own science university and the ways in which we train. That said, even at scale, we also try to leave room and hold space. I don't know what the best word or ways to describe this is. For SDR work is still one-to-one. It's still, when I'm on a call with somebody and it's a cold call, it's me and you. There is nobody sitting over my shoulder. There's nobody, other voices in the mix. It's a solo, so to speak, endeavor, at least from the SDR side or our callers. And as such, there's a lot of room for creativity. There's a lot of room for understanding the role that I'm here to play and the kinds of ways that I want to take a conversation, understanding the craft, if you will, of the art of leading a conversation to an outcome that is in the best interest of the prospect you're talking to.
Right. Yeah. And acknowledging, to your point, of leaving space so that you're acknowledging not everybody does it the same way.
No. In fact, that would be one of if we're going super weeds for a second, this is the healthy tension that I think exists between crafting out scripts and ultimately having a conversation, right? Because one of the worst criticisms that I may make of any, say, cold call would be, well, that sounded really scripted.
Right.
You sounded robotic. Something along those lines where, what we would argue in the opposite case is, no, you should sound more human. Being a good listener is a very human trait.
Yeah. Yeah. You've read my book. No argument for me on that. All right. So last thing I wanted to get into is given the masses of people that work for you in this role, you probably have more experience in hiring SDRs than most organizations.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what have you learned in terms of, the hiring what are sort of the, if you can, somewhat generalized, but the qualities or experiences or attributes that are the most reliable predictors of success for an SDR?
Well, I'll answer it first from a company level, because I think that this actually matters, and it matters a great deal, or at least it does to me. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a biased view. One of the things that we've spent sufficient amount of capital on, both like resources and maybe not as much money, but we tend to believe here at Science that your brand is what everybody says it is. And that's just as true of employer branding as it is people that might hire you.
Mm-hmm.
So, any employee deciding, wow, Science, that looks like a good place to work. What signals are they going to pay attention to? And we've spent, time running effectively like ENPS surveys and getting the opinions and kind of like the word of mouth inside Science, out of Science.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've used, a variety of companies in this regard, Glassdoor, Indeed, Comparably, you name it, great places to work. We've found that one of the best ways to attract good talent, net new, if you will, in our own sales cycle, is what recruiting frankly is to have people have a perception that we're a really cool place to work, really good culture to join, with values and ethics, and the kind of place where you could see yourself spending, quality hours, probably more than you would spend with your family or otherwise, because that's what work is in the modern era. So along those lines, like the corporate answer that I'm giving you is we care a lot about our kind of like brand impressions and the experience that our employees have, and paying it forward so that we're attracting the kinds of folks that when they sign up and join Science are a cultural net plus, are hitting the ground running, have a shorter, kind of like level up curve, are more likely to work in teamwork together and collaborate effectively, can uphold our corporate values going forward. And believe you me, it's unless I paint like a really pretty picture, this is hard stuff.
Right.
And the journey from like, at least when I joined Science, it wasn't even called Science then. And, like 100 people to now 11x that,
Right.
there's been a few gray hairs along the way. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Just in your beard.
Yeah, that's right. Just a little salt and pepper. There you go.
Yeah, but it sort of, again, if I dig down a little bit, is because I think this is something that people really struggle with. Is you're bringing people into this job that is a very difficult job. Have you highlighted like one or two some things, qualities that
Sorry, I didn't answer that.
Predictors of success.
I apologize for not finishing off the question. So one of the traits that I will tell you that we over-index on all the time, that's curiosity. Mm-hmm. And the curious mind is one where I really think of it best applied to the unspoken work contract. So the curious mind is one that will focus on craft, that will focus on the behavioral psychology of, opening up a conversation with a prospect for instance. And they will try to learn for themselves, because they're curious, what would make me more effective? Having that conversation over and over, day in and day out, with similar personas. What's going to make me more effective the next time out, the next day? The curious mind for us becomes a proxy for the kinds of people we want to hire, because they'll fill in a lot of those gaps that, frankly, you can't teach. Yeah.
Well, do you have a way of assessing curiosity?
Yeah, you ask. And then you ask for proof points.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it is, would you consider yourself a curious person? And then walk me through something that you got really interested in and what you did about that.
Mm-hmm.
And let them take you on a story of wherever that curiosity led them,
right?
As a demonstrated proof point in their world.
Right.
Again, no right or wrong answer, just levels or degrees of what curiosity means to them. And that's usually a pretty good indicator of that particular skill that we're indexing on.
Right. Yeah. CQ.
Yeah.
Curiosity quotient, not just IQ and EQ, CQ.
We love that.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, I think that's, and assessing it, I think is always sort of the challenge, but that's what I ask, because I think that's, for me, that's what I would lead with, right? If I was saying, look, so I always sort of think of the, like the NFL draft. A lot of teams talk about, we draft the best available athlete.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that's sort of what you're trying to do when you're hiring people in sales and for me, what constitutes the best available athlete is really, people with sort of inherent curiosity. Yeah. I mean, I think everybody has it. It's just, are you able to sort of let it loose?
Just like in the NFL, not every best available athlete translates onto the field.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The hit rate is not exactly high, depending on one's favorite team and their GM.
But one of the examples I give about the difficulty of hiring is you look at the millions of dollars spent on scouting and the NFL Combine and the testing they do and the with that Wonderlic test, which is an aptitude test, intelligence test, physical test. They do background checks, blah 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 blah. And the hit rate is still very low. It's like the number of. I had this statistic because I was writing about this a couple of years ago. And I forget what it is, but the number of like first round draft choices that end up being all pros, very low. Yeah, very low. And so,
I think it's less than 10%, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's something like that. So for us in business, we're hiring salespeople. We spend way less money in terms of evaluating and assessing the skills and the aptitudes and the talents of people. It's hard to. There's always good misses. But it's not a surprise that the hit rate tends to be relatively low.
I think that's true. The one little caveat that I might give between those two analogies is simply that the NFL is a highly desirable medium with inordinate salary scales to match, and there's only a few thousand NFL players in the world today roaming around. The stakes for business or the bars to cross for success are, I think, much lower. That said, there still are a lot of misses, if you will, in any endeavor along those lines. Hiring's hard.
No, it's very imprecise. And now there are companies that are doing things like I had someone on the show last year where they're you can't ask people for their W-2s, for instance, right, in California now, but there's a company that you can basically they're like search for me, basically voluntarily have to give it right to be considered, and they go, you give them permission to check your tax records, for instance. But I think even that is sort of a bogus measure of or bogus predictor, let's say, of success.
On my college baseball team, we used to call those things mandatory optionals.
That's right, mandatory. That's exactly right. So, all right. Well, Eric, thank you very much for joining me.
It's been my pleasure. This was fun.
Yeah. So if people want to find out more about science and connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. Science.com. And again, that's science without the S. And we are, kind of open in here 24/7, 365 on our website. For me in particular, if you wanted to reach out on LinkedIn, there's luckily not too many Eric Quanstroms in the world.
Are not.
Shockingly. Yeah,
right.
I'm not a Bill Johnson
No, or John Smith. Yes.
No John Smith here. So ultimately finding me is super easy and connecting with me is generally even easier still. So.
Okay, cool. Well, Eric, a pleasure as always.
Thanks, Andy.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. As always, I'm so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank my guest and friend, Eric Quanstrom, for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you could also leave us a rating or a review, let us know how we're doing, well, we'd certainly appreciate it. And you can do all that on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this episode is over. So thank you for your help. And as always, thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.